Hello there, John Coturillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you all for joining us for this episode, and as usual, thank you to everyone who makes our work possible. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce my guest, Dr. Katrina Andrews at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. Dr. Andrews, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Would you like to tell us a bit about your work and the university?
Hello. Well, thank you for your welcome, John. I'm an employee at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and my role is the senior lecturer, and I'm in the discipline of counselling. But like any academic role, there's many arms to that role. So I am a teacher in the classroom, but I also am a course coordinator, which means I have control of the course and the content, and look after all the other tutors in a course. I'm also a program coordinator, so I do that same thing, but at a higher level at the whole of Bachelor of Counselling program. I'm also a HDR supervisor, which I enjoy. And then a few other roles that are more school-based and administrative. Yeah, so I really enjoy the role, and thank you for having me, John.
It's my pleasure, and your background, I'm sure, will certainly be well informed to today's topic. And today's topic for discussion is the effects of artificial intelligence, hereon referred to as AI, on how we think, how our minds work, our cognition, as it would. Now, a reminder to our audience, as per usual, that nothing you find on the internet or in the media is advice. If you need help of any description, please speak to someone you trust, professional or otherwise. Something else that I need to remind our audience, as per usual, is that our discussions that we host here are all about analysing ideas and questioning them so that we don't take any for granted. So you may hear ideas today with which you don't agree. You may hear ideas today with which you do agree, perhaps quite strongly so. In order to be truth seekers, we have to detach from the ideas themselves and be willing to analyse them. So please take it in that vein. Now, Dr. Andrews, I actually contacted you originally because I heard you speak at a recent public event in which you discussed the role of artificial intelligence in education. My regular listeners will know that I have some quite strong convictions about the rise of artificial intelligence in our society. What are your perspectives on, perhaps it's a rather broad topic, but your perspectives overall on artificial intelligence? Do you find that it has a place? Do you find that there might be some disadvantages to it? What are your personal perspectives?
Personally speaking, like any, and I'm going to use revolution, industrial revolution, regardless of what the public say or don't say, it's happening. And we also know through history that if the populace doesn't at least try to understand the thing that's rising, they quickly fall behind. And so I do see the rise of AI, this new concept of AI, as the next revolution. Regardless of whether we like it or hate it, it's here. It's not going anywhere. So I see the responsible community member at least try and understand it, educate themselves and try and understand it, with the end goal of not being left behind. So like you said, John, the importance of critical thinking and and the word critical in the academic sense. So in other words, learning about what are the advantages of AI, but coupling that with learning about what are the known disadvantages of AI, and then armed with that knowledge, make up your own mind. So with that said, in the discipline of counselling, in the early days, and when I say early days, this revolution is probably one of the quickest. So I only mean about 12 months ago, when AI was nowhere where it is now. Myself and a few colleagues decided to test, not just make the decision, but to test what would happen if we adopt some AI tools to aid in the education of counsellors. Both in terms of the creation of learning activities, as well as assessing them. And in so doing, by no means were we taking the human element out of counselling education, rather just picking out pieces and instead of using human toil, passed some tasks over to AI. For example, the creation of a weekly lecture or something like that. So we researched the idea of what would happen, how would it be perceived or how would it be received if a weekly lecture was created by an AI that makes podcasts versus doing a manual creation with camera, etc., with a human speaker. Results were mixed, actually. Some students said it didn't replace their actual weekly readings. Instead, it helped them get an overview of the readings, so when they went into their readings, they understood them better. Some students who were time poor appreciated it because they could go and at least listen to the podcast, the AI-generated podcasts, at times when at weeks when they didn't get the time to do the weekly readings. These sort of comments were also mixed in with also a lot of opposition. Students perceived them. I suppose I would put them in the category of uncanny valley. They opposed the accents of the AI speakers. They didn't trust the information that AI pulled out of the weekly readings to talk about in the podcast, feeling that they had been left out, etc. And indeed, they mentioned that they missed the human touch. So we took that, and that's in terms of the creation of learning activities. The other side, as I said, was helping us with the assessment. So we trialled an AI avatar, giving it a script that we created, and the AI avatar was prompted to be a counselling client and to assess a single microskill, such as their ability to present informed consent to the client in a satisfactory way, etc. So it was for first years only, because we didn't assess dialogue, but rather the student recorded their skill that was prompted by the AI avatar, who was speaking using a prompt that we humans created. Again, results were mixed. Some students said they really appreciated the opportunity to practice their skills before actually recording their actual response. They appreciated that it was a really small time frame, like 1 minute recording. The educators themselves appreciated that it was a time-limited assessment and didn't blow out their workload. But there was also those oppositions. They again missed the human interaction, the human presence, etc. So again, there was the naysayers, but there was also the advantages. And I should say also the students that had LAP plans, that mean learning access plans. So they're certainly identifying that they have some disability that is associated with their learning. And those students did actually mention that these, the former mentioned podcasts, did help them when with their learning, given that they have trouble reading a whole document, something, because of problem like dyslexia. So the results were mixed. There were advantages to the use of AI and disadvantages to the use of AI. And we've taken all of those findings and used them to inform education in the future. We certainly recognise that AI has a place. It can help students with accessibility problems, etc., but it can never replace the human presence, the educator's presence within the classroom. So we're taking that on board, for future iterations of our trialling of AI and how it can most ethically be used.
What you've spoken to are a number of important factors which do warrant further discussion, but I'd also like to acknowledge to start that what you've also spoken to were the potential benefits of AI, in the sense that there are ways that a machine can work with a level of efficiency and accuracy that is not necessarily impossible in the realms of human cognition, but perhaps more practically achieved within time constraints. A good example is washing machines. It uses AI to ensure that water usage and electricity usage is optimal, and that the washing loads are treated optimally. Now, before we had that technology in home appliances, we had to be a lot more watchful of those appliances to ensure that they were operating as they should. But the introduction of the artificial intelligence element allows us to let the machines work for themselves while we engage in other activity that does require our attention. So, in a manner of speaking, that the use of artificial intelligence there actually allows the task to be completed with a greater level of faithfulness to the original goal, but without the need for human interaction. Similar examples might be seen, for example, in coding. Now, coding does require a certain level of human interaction because machines can't talk to themselves at their basal level. They need a human being to have the vision in order to make them work. But if you need an applet coded, which I have done in the not too distant past, but you don't have time to learn the sophisticated coding necessary to make it happen, then there's nothing wrong with using an artificial intelligence bot to make it, as long as you test it and make sure that it does exactly what you need it to do. So there are instances in which the level of cognitive commitment that one would need to make, and practical commitment as well in terms of your physical labour, would actually be more than is worthwhile doing in actuality, and it would actually be worth outsourcing it to another machine, because then it allows you to engage in activity that's actually meaningful and that allows you to achieve more goals than you otherwise normally would be able to. And when that's adopted at a widespread level, that has quite an advantage. What we also need to acknowledge, though, is that there are potential disadvantages. You made two specific points that I think warrant further discussion. The first thing I'd like to discuss is the idea of collective habits. Now, talking about the use of AI in education, the creation of a podcast that summarizes a particular amount of content, if it was done by a human, it would be quite time consuming. And the use of an AI bot allows that to be done far more efficiently. Something that I've discussed extensively in my work that I'm going to bring to bear here is how our minds set habits and how our minds create standards about what's acceptable and unacceptable and similar. Minds need an idea about how to interact with the world, and we all have cognitive tendencies that involve absorbing information, analysing it, and then interpreting it and using that to make decisions. One of the sources of information that we most commonly use is our own actions. We evaluate them, we interpret what those actions mean about the world and about us, and then we use them to shape ideas that then influence how we make further decisions. And in the 1960s and 70s, a rather well-known, at the time, Canadian psychologist, Dr. Albert Bandura, coined the term reciprocal determinism. It's one of the most fundamental principles on which we operate. I think it should be taught more often in academic psychology and psychotherapy, because it very much informs how we function. But when we behave in a certain way, we then interpret what that means. We form ideas. Those ideas then form a basis for how we behave in the future. That then affects what happens around us, and then we observe what happens around us, and that provides further feedback about whether to keep the same ideas or whether to modify them or change them drastically, depending on what we see there. From that phenomenon comes what we colloquially might call the slippery slope. When we make a decision, one of the key forms of information that we use is similar decisions we've made about similar issues in the past. So if we have to, for example, make a decision about whether to use AI in a particular circumstance, or even more broadly, how much effort to spend on something, often what we do is we refer to other situations in which we've had to do similar tasks and we've looked at how much effort we've spent there, and therefore what would be relevant or acceptable or suitable here. Now, if we maintain a given standard, that is to say we follow exactly the same precedent every time, then that creates consistency. A problem can occur if we start to change those standards. As we change those standards about what is acceptable in those same situations, we are constantly referring to a modified standard. So if we were to quantify it somehow, this is hypothetical, it's impossible to really quantify this, but if we quantify that in a given situation we spend 100% effort, every time we approach that same situation, we then refer to that precedent that we spend 100% effort. If one day we decide to spend 90% effort, then the standard we then use is 90% effort. Now, according to the original standard, if we were to say, let's try spending 80% effort instead of 100% effort, it might be unacceptable to us, but 90% doesn't seem so bad. But if the next time we approach that situation and the standard is 90%, then 80% doesn't seem so bad. And the next time 70%, 60%, and so on. The problem is that we need consistency in our standards. And one of the problems that I foresee happening is if we constantly change the precedent about what is necessary for us to personally engage in entirely and what's acceptable to then outsource to a machine, we may then reach a point whereby we're actually using less of our minds than is optimal for us mentally and potentially degrading the quality of our cognition. And I've seen evidence that this actually does happen, but that's something for a little bit later. What are your perspectives, Doctor, on how we could potentially prevent that from happening, or what the nature of that phenomenon might be?
I very much advocate that now and in the future, AI is not going to be something, the rhetoric that it's going to take over the world. I actually don't agree with that. Rather, I consistently and more so see AI in any occupation, not just where I am in my little world, but in any occupation, in any person's use of AI. AI is simply a tool, not a takeover. It's a tool. But at the end of the day, the end product, the thing that the AI has produced, is always fact-checked or critiqued by the human before anything's taken on board. So that I am an advocate that AI and humans can work together as long as the human has the last say before the end product, whatever that happens to be, is trusted, is believed, is put out there in the world for consumption. Hoping that slippery slope that you're talking about doesn't occur, or indeed is slowed down, or with that alerted human mind, that the slippery slope can be noticed and put on hold. But that's the ideal world. I recognise that. What's beautiful about human is that, yes, we're all flawed too, and some that ideal is often why it's an ideal. It's something we aspire to, and a lot of us don't. But wouldn't it be nice if we can take the errors that humans are prone to out of the equation? But we can't, because that's what makes us human. So that's all, I suppose, we can say about that. Yeah,
you're certainly right that in its practical sense, AI should be a tool. I think we need to determine, or discern rather, between what should be and what is. So AI should be a tool. The problem is, how do we know and recognize the point at which it is starting to influence us? I'd argue that we actually don't recognize it, because again, if we're constantly comparing our standards or our acceptable standards to a changing standard, we're constantly allowing it to happen without recognizing it. That's one of the flaws of human cognition, is that we often don't recognize these things. One of the most important parts of history, which I'm not going to say is without flaw, they've caused destruction. It's certainly caused destruction, and it's certainly caused a lot of harm. But the idea of tradition, convention, standards of propriety, standards of discipline, it's also present in the military and in police training. is that societies throughout the world, throughout history, and entities that still exist, like the military, recognize that if we don't set a standard for our minds, and more importantly, if we don't exercise them, like deliberately put them to use so that they continue to strengthen in terms of their abilities, then our drop in standards will be unnoticeable at first, and then by the time we notice it, we would have lost time and quality of output. Perhaps it may be considered an ideal that we recognise the slippery slope, but my argument would be if we want to, we can. It's just a matter of setting standards for ourselves and then saying we shall not cross these lines. Yes, it may take time. Yes, it may take effort, but if what we're potentially risking is our cognition as individuals and our capacity as a species, I would argue that effort is completely worthwhile to set standards and to just not cross the boundaries. Because yes, we can always say it should be a human being having the final say, but then the fact that we've allowed a machine to actually do that effort for us in the first place means that us having the final say is actually still less cognitive exercise than it would have been to create the product in the first place. And the creation of the product is part of the cognitive exercise. So there's still a danger there that even if we have the final say, we're still not having as much of a cognitive input as we would have otherwise, which could then, in the long term, lower our standards about what's sort of acceptable in terms of our cognitive practices.
Yeah, all of your points are valid. I suppose in terms of, as you say, the cognitive input and its slippery slope, and therefore, and with the humans, with our imperfect perfection, not notice that slippery slope, that our standards are going down. And your assertion is we need to decide on what are those standards in a deliberate sense, so that we can notice, instead of going down the slippery slope, we can notice when that cognitive decline occurs and halt it before it's too late. Sure, that's amazing. I'm going to add here that, and I'm speaking again for me, not anybody else and their use of AI, but I certainly make sure that when I adopt an AI tool, as a tool, AI is not doing my thinking for me. It's rather doing the menial tasks that don't require a lot of thinking. Instead, the administrative, if for want of a better word, the large creation sort of stuff, that would have been sparked by the human intervention and for the creation of the prompt, etc. The idea even. The menial task, the labour, is done by AI, and then the result of that labour is again come back to me for checking, tweaking, editing, improving until I get the product that I'm looking for. So in that sense, AI as a partnership, I see AI as doing all the grunt of the work. The beautiful cognitive ideas, high level thinking is reserved for the human in my space, but I can, that's, I suppose, my take on it all. So.
And indeed, every time one of us uses a search engine, we're effectively using a form of artificial intelligence. So
yes.
It's certainly present in our lives. We're also starting to see the use of AI in instances where the effort itself is actually meant to be the means and the end. By that I mean in creative pursuits, creating music and creating art.
Yeah.
To be perfectly frank, and I've been very candid about this, and I'll continue to be, that I'm completely against the use of AI for the creation of artwork in a serious sense, for a very simple reason, because the beauty of art is meant to be that the human mind is exercised in its creation and you can then be proud of the output. But if you're using AI, I don't care what anyone says, it's not human effort and it's not a human created piece. And I don't think that constitutes the utility of art. I think the imperfection in art is what makes it fantastic. I think that's what we love about art, that there's some kind of natural quality to it that can't be replicated by a machine. The whole fun and the fulfillment is the effort, the creation. So it may be good for mass content production, but that's more of an economic use. That's more for the generation of income from content.
I agree with you. I think most of the population, when I say population, humans, I agree with you. Yeah, the enmeshment of AI and the creation of art absolutely is an ongoing debate.
Something else to which I'd also like to explore is based on another point that you made, an important one. Because AI has become so widespread, if it becomes a norm in some sense, then effectively a person who doesn't at least adapt to it to the extent that it's necessary to use it in their own life may be left behind, so to speak. This speaks to a concept that I'm not sure if this is the language that other people use, but what I call manufactured needs. And this is something that I actually spoke to in a recent episode that I recorded, and it's something that will probably be a theme throughout my work in the future. But our needs are a lot more basic than what we think they are. A lot of what we consider to be needs are manufactured by social constructs, and as I've discussed before, social constructs are essentially ideas that are not inherent in nature, but we invent them to fulfill a cognitive need, to fulfill a need for us to feel something or to think something. Now, manufactured needs are not inherently, I wouldn't say they're inherently destructive, and also, given that we have quite a few of them in our contemporary society, it wouldn't be an idea to try to destroy them, because if they become enmeshed in our society or ingrained in our society for long enough, effectively they become needs to the extent that if we were to try and break them, they would disrupt the functioning of society. But at our natural core, they're not needs. Some examples of manufactured needs are money and economics. Our creator didn't create, or our nature didn't create economics. We invented money as a proxy to obtain other things that we need: food, water, shelter, protection, etc. Many cultural norms in any sort of culture are effectively manufactured needs because nature didn't invent them. We invented them as a means of making sense of the world. And as I said, having a set of standards by which you live your life, which may also be parallel to cultural norms, are actually quite healthy in many ways, because they make sure that our minds are constantly attuned to a set of goals that are going to stand us in good stead in terms of our survival and our social cohesion. But at their core, they are technically manufactured needs. Now, to the topic at hand in AI, to actually adapt to AI or get left behind is an example of a manufactured need. Now, there may be instances where AI is quite justifiable because it allows us to be more productive as people, because it lets us use the mental resources that we have more thoroughly and more in a more widespread fashion than we would otherwise be able to if we had to spend all that time attending to the menial tasks. But to say that it becomes a need, I would say, is somewhat fallacious, because it's something that we've created. And one of the tendencies that we have is cognitive dissonance, something else which I've spoken to often. Cognitive dissonance is essentially the tendency to want what we think, how we feel, and what we do to all be consistent with each other, because it creates a illusion of the world being a rather orderly, structured, and logical place whereby everything fits together neatly and makes sense. And because we are cognitively dissonant as humans, it's just one of our natural tendencies. What can happen is, when something becomes widespread, we then look for a reason to use it. And when we look for a reason to use it, we start to justify, well, I'm using it because it's a need, it's necessary. And it becomes self-justifying. Is it possible that cognitive dissonance could indeed lead us to believe that we need to use AI in instances where we actually don't, or perhaps it would actually be better for us to use our own minds? Also, providing that we tend to like shiny things, so to speak. Like, humans are very attracted to things that are novel, and we tend to see things and go, oh, that's cool, I'd love to make use of it. And before we know it, we're starting to think it's a need, much like drugs, alcohol.
AI as a need, or by extension, what I said was something that if we don't adopt, learn, we are left behind. I suppose the context of when I said that was very much not as a need as is understood in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, i.e., you need to satisfy the needs of hunger and shelter, etc., to get to the next level of needs, etc. I suppose I don't really mean it from that perspective, but I appreciate your point of view there. I suppose I'm very much recognising that we live in in this century, the 2025 and on beyond, and these things are happening around us, regardless of whether we like them or not. And I suppose I very much value my and others or humans' ability to adapt to what's going on. And I suppose I'm talking about it from that sense, and in particular in regards to, we live in a society at the moment that, whether we like it or not, we're asked to get an education, which tools us to get a job, which tools us to get to pay taxes, and so and so and so. Everything goes around in a circle. So I see it in that aspect. So for us to at least live in the society we happen to be born in at this point in time, not only do we need to have a level of understanding, like reading and writing, etc., and more recently those soft skills that employers are looking for to get that job so you can pay those taxes. I see AI as another one of those soft skills, I suppose. Those a particular literacy, or if I'm not too sure I'm fully formed in the word AI literacy yet, but some sort of AI awareness, AI ethical mindedness, at least, for you to remain competitive in today's society to get that job, so you can earn that income, so you can pay the taxes to keep our governments happy. That's, I suppose, in that context, that's what I'm thinking when I say it's something that if we don't understand, we are well left behind. It's in that sense that I mean.
That's certainly true, and something that I've discussed before is that even though something might be manufactured, if it becomes ingrained enough in society, it would be practically impossible to dismantle it. Literally, it would be possible in a sense that anything is technically possible if you put your mind to it and gather enough people to support it. But in a practical sense, destroying or dismantling an entire system is far more difficult than people would like to tell you that it is. At the same time, I would argue that I think fewer people actually like AI than what the media and what companies will make us believe. A lot of companies will wax lyrical about the greatness of their AI product or the greatness of how efficient they are because they use AI. The media will make you believe, including social media, that AI is great and that everyone loves it. But if you talk to enough people, I would argue most of them would probably give you an idea that they're quite skeptical of where it's going to lead, and they feel rather uncomfortable with the idea of interacting with AI on an extensive basis and not having human interaction. It depends also on the part that you ask them to evaluate. So, for example, if you were to ask them to evaluate their experience with AI in using a search engine, then they might find that quite useful. But if they were talking to an AI-powered answering service, they would probably find that if you were to ask them to honestly evaluate how they compare that to a human answering, I'm pretty certain that in most cases they would prefer the human answering. One of the tendencies that we have is to just let things happen, and a lot of people will simply say, "Well, that's the world. We have to adapt to it." But if enough of us decide, "No, I want a human answering," or "No, I want to put my own brain into it, and I want to have other people put their own brains into it," we could stop the slippery slope, but we have to then decide to, or we have to make a decision collectively. This is what we want for our society, but I can almost guarantee it won't happen, is because practical psychology isn't really taught. We're not really taught how our minds work, but if we were taught to critically think, a lot more people would be standing up and saying, "No, I want there to be limits on how we use AI. If we decide to use it this way, then that's what's going to happen. And if we choose this, then it's our freedom to choose." But with that freedom also has to come the responsibility for the consequences. I thoroughly believe in our ability to use our minds for the greater good. And we have choices in that. So I think we can heal and we can change. It's just a matter of choosing to. But as much as people might call AI literacy, it can be in the same way that coding is. But you can also tell a lot about something by the company it keeps. And I think our quality of interaction has actually gone down. I've actually had a number of instances in which I've written something to someone, and I don't use AI in that. That's one of the standards that I sort of set for myself, that whenever I write something, I will always write something using my own cognitive power. And on a number of occasions, people have actually said, "This looks like it was written by AI." And I've had to, and one of them, quite frighteningly, one of them was a neuropsychologist, which is quite amusing. And I actually had to write back and say, it's not AI. I wrote that myself. The other instance was it was on social media, and the response to my saying that it wasn't AI was actually quite abhorrent. I'm not going to repeat it here, but the fact that we have become so used to AI basically now means that a lot of people, when they see something that's very well crafted, they look at that and go, "Oh, it must be AI." To me, that says people now think humans can't reach that standard, only a computer can. Eventually, that's what people are going to start believing. People already start to believe that, especially people who are brought up in future generations. They're not going to know how to write a business letter. They're not going to know what finely crafted literature looks like, because they're going to become used to essentially two different sides of communication and written communication: social media speak and AI generated text.
And it warms my heart. We are, you and I, sitting here in this podcast, are not the only people having this very, very conversation. So, and indeed, the importance of the human critical thinking ability is a well-known fact. Sure, I agree. And yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. We need to promote the teaching, the actual teaching of critical thinking, even at an earlier level, to survive all this. Absolutely, is a must. Absolutely. I want to return, though, to you alluded to the fact that there's a lot, the popularity of AI may not be as big as we're hearing in the media, and in and indeed, a lot of people, I think you use the word, there's a lot of fear out there about AI. And I wonder if we didn't have the Hollywood blockbusters out there, Terminator, etc. If they never existed, would that fear be as equal as it is now? I do wonder if the fear is, and usually is, result of misunderstanding and indeed possibly being given these false ideas about artificial intelligence that has been fed into the human populace up to now. So, and that where that critical thinking comes in, absolutely. So if we as a human race do learn not to just be absorbers and consumers of knowledge, of things. I mean, instead, critically analyze, question, review, etc. And based on the probability of evidence that we've gathered in front of us, make our decision. Yeah, certainly we'd be in a much better position. But yeah, so I agree, absolutely.
The idea of fear being manufactured, again, fear can be manufactured. It is frequently manufactured. I'd argue that the fear is not unfounded, though, because while AI has a lot of potential, and again, it can be used in a way that doesn't interrupt the functioning of the human race and actually aids it, I would say that a lot of the ideas about AI taking over the world, the way that we see it in the movies, for example, with robots, that may well be possible someday, certainly not in our lifetime. But in terms of whether it's taking over the world, I would say in many ways it's affecting us in more ways than we realize, and in many ways it has the source of AI has changed our ethos in a sense that our society is now fundamentally affected in its functioning in ways that it wouldn't have been had the source of AI not existed. And I'm not making a causal argument here, because AI didn't cause this to happen. What actually happened was the human tendency to seek or novelties then resulted in the seeking of novelties that weren't necessarily what we needed. We hear about problems in need of solutions, but what we also often do is we create solutions and then seek problems to solve. And if we can't seek a problem to solve because of that cognitive dissonance, what we sometimes do is we create problems so we can say, oh, look, this solution perfectly solves this problem when the problem didn't exist beforehand. I don't judge people this way. When I have these types of conversations, it's more as a wake-up call for people to say, we're worth the effort, we're worth investing in ourselves. But I'd say the source of AI is not AI itself, it's the desire to spend less effort. And that in itself comes from hedonism. It comes from our mind's desire to live as easy a life as possible because effort is quite taxing and it stresses us, which is undoubtedly the case.
I come from teaching counselling, and the fundamental philosophy of the program that I teach is human-centeredness or person-centeredness, which is our Carl Rogers. And so I do come from a position of the drive, the inner drive of a human being is to self-actualize, to improve, not just make things better. So, yes, AI was human creation, and we are always looking to better, actualize, improve, progress. So I'd like to put those, I suppose I put those words in that space rather than make things easier for ourselves.
I think our intention is to progress, but the execution of the idea is us trying to make things easier. I mean, again, AI didn't cause this, but the source of it wanting to try to make things easier. I don't know about you, but in my work, I liaise with a lot of different businesses whereby time is of the essence, and having responses that are accurate and timely and having attention to detail should be non-negotiable. People's attention to detail in my line of work I've found has actually gone down, but in social services, in terms of liaising with other businesses, just in my personal life, in terms of personal stakeholders and people in my personal circle, not my sort of immediate personal circle, but just the people that I've met over the years, I'm seeing traces of that same attitude of people wanting to make life as easy as possible without realizing a lot of the joy in life comes when you spend the effort and really wrap your mind around problems and not just try to get by with the least possible effort. But in our day and age, with all these things making life easier, we should be quicker, we should be more efficient, and yet sometimes, I'm liaising with businesses that never write back to me. I'm liaising with businesses that never answer their phones. I'm liaising with people that don't even, they claim they don't have the time, but they've got all these technologies that are meant to be making life easier. I've been in workplaces where the culture was basically 5 minutes work, an hour break. And I've looked at that and gone, look, we've got all this technology. Life should be easier. There's no reason why you can't finish at 5 o'clock. Just put the effort in while you're at work, and then after work you can have your smoke break. But there's lots of potential for technology to make life easier, but instead I think we're getting slack with it. And again, I think that needs to be a wake-up call. We need to really value, we have a brain given to us by Mother Nature or God, whoever created us, and we should really cherish that, nurture that, and really exercise it. We shouldn't let it make us slack, because then that would just be a waste of human potential. I don't want to see that.
No, none of us do. 100%. Yeah. And on top of, I hear what you're saying. These 5-minute stints with an hour smoke, exaggeration intended. Would you also agree too that with the additions of all the technologies over the years, first of all, the machines, as you say, in your example, washing machine, followed by the internet, followed by, the AI now, as these things come into our lives, so do our expectations and so they're made, I suppose they're introduced into our lives with the intention, I suppose, of making life easier. But instead, it just ups the expectations we have on ourselves, on our output, etc., and just makes our life busier than ever. Would you agree?
our expectations do get quite high. A good example of that is in the social services industry, where case managers are working with 50, 60 client caseloads, and that is not tenable for anyone to actually provide proper personalised service to each of those clients.
Yeah,
There are confounding variables there, like population increase, the fact that more people are suffering disadvantage as a result of economic conditions, the fact that we also have a larger number of social services available, which people are now accessing due to those needs. So we do tend to create unrealistic expectations, and in business especially, historically, that has been an issue, not just today, but probably throughout history. We've always set greater expectations than I think what is practically tenable for us. But the way that our enterprise and our economy as a whole operates is far below what we're actually capable of. Perhaps our expectations might be too high, but it's still far less than what we're capable of. But I think a big part of the secret isn't really a secret. It's not expecting people to work harder. It's using the technology in a better way and letting people use their efforts to work smarter. And again, I've witnessed a lot of that too. We have all this technology, and yet people still haven't learned to use it optimally. Like that, they still use it in a way that is actually spending more effort than they have to, and spending less time on the things that they would have to personally do with their own minds, which I think might even be related to perhaps that need for instant gratification, where we just want a solution and we think, okay, got it, move on, instead of taking 5 minutes to think about it and go, okay, what might the consequences of this be, and can I improve it? Which still requires human input, but once you spend that input, you have a working, sustainable solution.
And those questions go back to our argument that, the importance of that human tool that we have that can't be imparted on any sort of machine is that critical thinking. But we need to keep in mind that, we as humans also are developmental, and to ask a teenage boy to critically think in the ways that you just gave an example of, I think, i.e. the immediate consequence of their actions, is not developmentally, we know it's not developmentally part of being a teenager, or, so these asks, or the critical thinking, etc., so that we don't go down the slippery slope or don't fall into the dangers that are possible with the unchecked use of AI. Sometimes developmentally for the particular user might not be possible, but these are all issues that we need to be aware of. Absolutely.
I would actually argue a counter to that. I would say developmentally, different parts of life are associated with certain cognitive abilities, and yes, certain stages of the developmental cycle when you're a child or a teenager are associated with cognitive abilities that may not be quite optimal for certain types of tasks. So you certainly would not expect the average 10-year-old to perform brain surgery. But a large part of, again, how children's minds work is through nurturance and through learning. Given the right environment, children are capable of more than what we give them credit for. I'll give another example of this. I'm fascinated by military history and police history. That's something that I enjoy very much, and also police dramas and similar. In places in the world where firearms are a big part of their sporting culture, you'll have adults who are in their 50s and 60s who are completely irresponsible with weapons, but then you'll have 10-year-olds whose etiquette is absolutely pristine to the letter. Like, they will never have an accident with a weapon because they are absolutely attuned to their handling and they are completely aware. No child can do that alone. It requires loving discipline from their parents and their parents' active involvement in raising them. I think there's actually a real risk that, again, as you say, our expectations are raising, which means, and especially with our economic conditions, both parents are working now. Parents are spending less time with their children. Children are spending more time alone in the company of schools, after school care, with technology, and those sources are not teaching them the same way that conscientious parents are going to be able to teach them. There's a real risk that that's distorted our view about what's developmentally appropriate. If you have a parent, or at least one parent, but preferably two, who are really taking the time to nurture their children and teach them things, we'd be surprised at what children can achieve. there are children of whom I've learned. There have been clients I've sat down with who tell me about their children, and they say, when my kids see something on television, the first thing they say is, "Mum, Dad, is this real, or is this just one of those stories that the media are trying to sell us?" Or, my collaborator Ebony Woolmarkey, we've made a couple of different episodes together. She homeschools her children, and she says her children never stop learning from the time they get up to the time they go to bed. They're constantly learning about the world, and she gives them, discipline in terms of only having screen time for certain periods, and they're only allowed access to certain educational content, and it makes sure that it's nurturing. So yes, we can't expect children to do everything, but I think they're capable of more than what we give them credit for. And if we want them to be raised right, us as the adults have to take responsibility for teaching them, which means sitting them down and saying, no, you're not going to use AI to write your essay. I'll help you form the skills to write your essay, but then you're going to write the essay. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to learn from the mistakes, and then you're going to use them to improve the next essay you write. That's part of the human experience.
That's ideal. Well, John, I love what you're saying. If we are to live in the future with AI as our partner, we need to have a level of thinking where we have the oversight of AI such that we can free up our time to raise our children in a way that you just described. So it become a beautiful cycle. So what you're describing is this beautiful symbiotic relationship between human and AI in the future. That's not AI is going to take over the world, but AI is going to give us the space that we so desperately need to be good humans. Yeah, that is the ideal world. Yeah.
I can't say for certain, but I think there are countries in the world that may already be on that path, that their average work weeks are shorter because they've learned to work smart and not hard. They spend the effort where it really helps, but overall, we really need to keep a check and cherish what we have. Something I often do is if I need to go somewhere new, I'll look up the route on Google Maps, I'll write notes, and then I'll actually memorize it like you would have had to do with a Melways 20 years ago. I do that on purpose, not because it's easier, but because it keeps my brain constantly working. Yeah. I'm constantly attuned. Same with my case notes when I'm seeing clients. I'm always writing on pen and paper. Same with a lot of things. I encourage people to really stretch their cognitive abilities. Well, Doctor, this has been a fantastic discussion. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, John, for having me. I really enjoyed myself. Yeah.
My pleasure. And for everybody out there, thank you very much for joining us. As per usual, if what you have heard today or anywhere else on the program or anywhere else in the media for that matter has raised concerns, please seek the advice of a professional or somebody else that you trust. And if you have ideas of your own that you'd like to hear discussed here, if you'd like to come onto the show and talk to me, please feel free to write to me. I always love to hear from my audience. And until next time, everyone, please take care of yourselves.